Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. On the phone with me today, I have Natasa Djukanovic in Montenegro. Natasa is the CMO of Domain.me and a personal branding expert. Natasa, thank you for joining me today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, I saw something online that a few years ago, brandyourself.com did a survey and found that 48% of people who Googled themselves were actually not really happy with the search results. And, you're a personal branding expert, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show. When we're looking for a new job, why do the search results matter in Google? Why should we care?
Whenever you meet somebody new, you would probably go for and Google them. And especially when you're looking for a job or you will want to employ somebody, that's the first thing you do, right? And that's why it's really important that you are presented well on Google. So, I guess 48% of people that were not happy with their search results, might be even more. We are never really happy with how we look online. But that's a process. I think it's very important that we always work on how we look online, or how people can find us.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. I mean, I almost think of our Google search results being similar to like a cover letter nowadays, because it's an extension of your personal brand. I'm curious, if we go and we Google ourselves and we're trying to decide what matters. Google may show 20 pages of search results or more. Do we need to go through every page? Like, how far into the Google search results do you think we should really care about?
Well, I think it's only a first page. If you want to, who said it? If you want to hide a dead body, you can put it on a second page of Google.
Is that a saying?
Yes. I don't think anybody goes there. So first page is enough. Might be a second if you have a common name, like some other people have a same name, like a name, surname like you. But I guess the first page is enough.
Okay. Well, so say we're looking at the first page. I mean, what should we be looking for? And is there anywhere that we should be looking other than Google? Like, are there other places we should also be checking?
Well, I know that lots of people would go to Facebook or LinkedIn and also search for name, surname. Google is definitely the first because it collects everything from all the places. But I would go for all the social media and check out everything that shows up about you on everywhere. Because sometimes somebody else can say something about you on social media, and you could show up there with something that you don't want to be shown. So I think we all have to be aware of those things there, even though we can't always influence on what shows.
Mm-hmm. Well, so say we do find something negative, like you mentioned, like we can't always clean it up, but what can we do? Like, what strategies do you recommend for people who are trying to clean up something that they find that's negative?
Deleting is always a good thing. But also creating content, because if you create something about yourself and put it online, then it will, if it's good, if it's connected with lots of people, if it has lots of likes and comments, it could show up higher on Google. And if you create more, then in some time you can just squeeze out the negative things and they can go to the second page.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have some bad things that you don't want to be seen and you can't delete them, that's definitely you have to create something good. Which means creating means not only something on social media, but a blog or writing something for somebody on their own blogs, or just something that connects with your name so that Google can recognize you and show you on the first page. It's a process and it needs time.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, you have a lot of experience with domain names. If we do create a blog, like what should be contained within that domain name?
Well, I would always say your name, surname. If you're looking for a job and you want to be I mean, we all have somebody that has a same name, surname as we do. And it sometimes can be a competition on it. But I think if you just stick to one name, it doesn't have to be exactly name, surname. It could be initials or a nickname or something, but always stick to the same that you can possibly use even on social networks, and then connect all of those. And you can go to Facebook and write and just share a link from your blog. But I think it's very important to have a website with your own name, surname. And it can be on any of the domains like .com. If you can find it, it's usually taken. But it should be something that sticks out, that people can connect with you.
Mm-hmm. And it almost sounds like we're thinking about sort of how Google works in terms of search engine optimization to kind of get you onto that first page. So I think like when you say name, surname, I think it sounds like probably here we'd probably call it like first name, last name. And like in my case, my name being Angela Copeland, I do own the website angelacopeland.com. And when I am producing content, it actually does rank quite highly. So it allows me to control some of the messages that are out about myself. Yeah. I'm curious, do you recommend that we also check, like, for example, Google Images while we're out there kind of looking?
Yes, definitely. Even YouTube. Because when you go on Google and you would check, first page is just links, and then the second would be images or videos. I would definitely check for everything, because sometimes on images can be something that you really don't want to be there.
Yes.
And people like to connect with those images. In regards to the websites, I think it depends actually of how far do you want to go with your name, surname. There are some people who have like different hats, so they would have different websites for different things that they do. For example, I have one for my hobby and one for my personal branding, which is just Natasa.me. So it's kind of presenting yourself in the best possible way and putting photos and content on those websites. That's what also Google Images and YouTube videos or any videos would show up there.
That makes sense. The thing that comes to mind, I hadn't even thought about YouTube. That's actually really smart, because when I'm looking for someone, that's actually one of the first places that I go. Because you can sometimes find video of the person speaking or presenting, and it really gives you a good concept about who they are.
Yeah.
But with regards to Google Images, I have seen a couple of cases. Like, I think it varies by country. I think some countries are a bit more reasonable about this, but in the US, mugshots, when anyone gets arrested, they go on the internet, regardless of what happened in a case or whatever, and they are attached to your name. And so I've seen a couple of cases, one in which there were mugshots with a person's name, but they were not the person in the mugshot. Like someone else had the same name who was doing a lot of criminal activity. And it was very problematic because they looked somewhat similar, and these mugshots were showing up. And then I also know of someone else who had a similar situation, but he had been arrested for something that eventually went away, but the pictures are still on the internet. And he's a professional, and it was a misunderstanding or something. But those pictures are still out there. And I know in his case, one thing, that I think someone in that situation could try, very often those mugshots are posted by a local television station. And sometimes, you can actually write them a letter and ask them to please remove it. You can explain that this case was dismissed and here's the paperwork and that sort of thing. And I think that sometimes they will actually take it down.
I
So,
think that's a big problem, especially if it's not, especially if somebody else is that, and then they look kind of same like you.
yes.
But as I said, that's how Google works. That's SEO, and that means that you have to post more of your photos where you show how actually you're different from that mugshot. And then it's important that you tag those photos properly, and that photos are distributed on your personal website, on social media, and if you can put it on different kind of like databases about names,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what you really want to have, that specific photo or a set of photography with your name, surname.
Mm-hmm.
People can see the difference. I've heard about those examples, and it's really bad, but it's a process. As I said, you have to work on it to remove it.
Mm-hmm. I know for me, there's a few hundred people that have the same name as me. And one of those people for a long time had a photograph of her in a bed. And it wasn't
Mm.
terribly controversial, but it was clear she was under a sheet, and it was clear that she maybe didn't have a shirt on under that sheet. And
Mhm.
she had a similar skin tone as me and similar hair color. And people would say to me, "Have you seen this photo of this Angela Copeland?" And I would say, "Yes, I've absolutely seen it." And I spent a lot of time, like you said, like uploading alternative photos that were actually me
Mhm.
to try to push her photo, the other person's photo down. And I
Mhm.
think actually it eventually worked because I don't think I've seen that photo in a while, but
Mhm.
I think it took years, really.
Yeah. Well, the problem with that kind of photos is that people really look at them
Right.
and then they get ranked better than they should be.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. Well,
Mm.
one thing that I think you mentioned is that if we were to go about cleaning things up, that potentially we shouldn't do it all at one time, that it should be a process. Can you
Yes.
talk to us a little bit about why it should be a process?
A process, it's not just because Google needs time to process to work on the SEO and search engine optimization. It's also about who you are and what do you want to present there. And we all change in time. Like once I worked in a bank, and I then work in the domain industry and marketing, and then I change as a person also. I grow. I learn some new things, and it's always, you always have to go back to how you present yourself and actually add those things that you became in the meantime. Which means that having a personal brand is a process, firstly, in terms of that you have to understand who you are and then present that correctly, like work on presenting your authentic being. Because, well, Mark Schaefer said there are so many people online, and if everybody would create it, it's kind of a boring, everybody becomes very similar. And you have to stand out, have to show that you are something else, that you have something specific. And in order to show that, you need to understand who you are and how you develop and what are the new things that you learn, which also means cleaning up not just for online world but also for offline.
That's a really good point. And I think sometimes, though, when we're switching careers, like we might not always know who exactly we are
Yeah.
or what our brand is. I mean, what if we find ourselves in that situation where like we don't know for sure what our next job will be and we're not quite sure what our personal brand should be?
Yeah.
In that case, what can we do?
Well, I think I think being honest about it is very important. Show up that you're searching for yourself, that you're trying to see what's your next endeavor. It might be even some kind of present what you were, but also present your values. Because I think in searching for a new job or or anything in life, you need to have your values set up. Because the new company that you're supposed to work should have the same values and culture like you do in order to be happy there, right? So
Oh,
that
absolutely.
means first understanding what is your culture and what's really important for you, what are your values and what are the things you would never do, and then put that online.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes excluding some things also defines you in a good way.
I think you're right, and you make some good points there because even if we're not sure exactly the job we're going to be doing, we do kind of know the type of person we want to be in that job,
Mhm, mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Right. I'm curious, like if we're thinking of looking for a new job, how far ahead should we start cleaning up our content? Like how long does it take for changes to begin to show up in Google?
It depends. It could be 3 months or 6 months. Uh, it depends of how saturated is the internet with you or your name or with your images. And I don't think we actually change that much that you want to delete everything you were before, because that's also a part of you and you should be proud of what you are, because accepting who you are is also a big and important part of being authentic, right? So deleting when you delete too many things of yours, it becomes you are then too clean, and then it doesn't show up you that you are a real person, that you are a human being, and you lose the authenticity.
That makes total sense. You know, I almost feel like when you talk about the time frame, it makes me think this should be kind of an ongoing thing that we monitor rather than
Mhm.
just doing it once when we're looking for a
Yeah.
job.
Yeah. Yeah, I think already from somewhere from high school you should start doing it. I always talk to my kids about it, like Google yourself and clean that. Like be sure
Yeah.
that you have only the things that you want to see there, that your mom or your aunt could see there. That's I mean, we all have like our digital footprint. Wherever
Yes.
we go, whatever we do, it just stays behind us, and we have to make sure that what stays is not something that you would be ashamed of in 10 years, or that your kids will be ashamed of, because now we're already speaking about how your kids are going to see you in 10 or 20 years.
Right. I think you make a really good point there. You know, I am one of the first generations that, and I think you probably are too, that grew up with the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, I mean, it became it was just starting to be a thing when I was in high school. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember putting the very first image of myself online when I was about 16. You know, and I
Mm-hmm.
remember what picture that was, and I was careful about the choice. But I think today children are so used to being a part of social media because they are from the day that they're born very often.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes they're maybe less careful about what they're posting because they don't sort of see this long-term implication.
Yeah, yeah. But it's also on the other side that you see lots of parents creating a personal brand of their kids, like posting their photos and then the jokes that kids say, and it's always very funny and cute and we all like it. But then at that point you actually start creating a personal brand of your child, an online life of your child. And
Yeah.
that child, when he or she, when they start actually using internet, they already have something in behind. And it's a choice of all of the parents, like everybody should choose what they want for their kids. And I wouldn't know what to do now if I would have small kids. I'm free to speak, like everybody can choose for themselves. I wouldn't know what to do, because I think we all can choose what do we want to put online or not.
Right. Well, I think it's kind of like for me when I was a child, childhood photos of me were in an album at my house.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone came over, they could look at this album. But it's
Mm-hmm.
very different for those pictures, you know, when you're a tiny child to be all over the internet. I think I don't have any children, so I can kind of speak freely,
Mm-hmm.
I guess. But I think I would be hesitant to post a lot of photos and to create that personal brand for the child that isn't consciously themselves making a decision about it.
Yeah. It's a big controversy. Everybody has their own opinion about it, and of course, I can agree with all of them, because we are the ones who guard our children, and we are supposed to know exactly what are we doing with those photos. But then also those kids will grow up, and then one day would probably have to delete all of those photos or find a way how to delete that.
Right. I mean, I think sometimes though, like if we are a parent that maybe doesn't work in technology or doesn't work on the internet, it maybe doesn't even cross our mind that this could come up in 20 years when our child is looking for a job.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't think about it. And, in addition to just posting like inappropriate photos and things, it seems like, this is a interesting time to be living in the world in terms of people have very different political views, and I see it happening all over the place, and very different religious views. Um, and it seems like when we're looking for a job, as we are cleaning up our online brand, it seems like those are some things we should also keep in mind, as how much we're sharing about things like politics and religion.
Yes, that became a big issue lately in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. I think all around the world. It's not just in the US. It's
Right.
here also. And I don't know what to say. I would rather never say anything political online, because I would never want to start a conversation about my political opinions, because of course I do have political opinion, but I don't think that's something for sharing, and that should influence the way how I work or my values. And that's what I also think for my employees, for everybody in my team. And we kind of agreed 10 years ago when we started that we will not do that online, because that nothing of the politics or religion should influence the way how we work. We have values. We know exactly what we want and how we behave to people. We as individuals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that also affects the company. And I know lots of companies and lots of people who are already fired because they stated something politically incorrect or something that was just not allowed by the company, by the employer. But I think those are some of the things that should stay kind of intimate, unless you're actually working in politics
Right.
or, I don't know, journalism, and then you can do it. But for any business, I don't think religion or politics or that kind of things should actually influence on who you are, because you have your values, right? You don't want to hurt other people. That should be like the first value, right?
Right.
And then, showing that online in these days, it's very, very controversial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say for me, it's a tough issue. I generally try to not share my views on politics, for example, but occasionally something will come up related to politics that is,
Yes.
it has to do with careers, for example, like pay equity. And in the US, that's kind of a political conversation about gender pay equality. And like for a long time, I didn't post about it, but now I post about it once in a while. But I typically post it on my business page, my career page, where that kind of makes sense a little bit in the context. But I don't often comment about what I believe. I maybe just share an article, and I try to share an article that's from a good, reliable source.
Yeah.
You
But
know,
also, these are not just political, it's your values, right?
right?
It's something, and values is something you stand for. And that means that you sometimes will lose some customers because of that, or some viewers, right? And I think values are something that costs money, but it represents you. It's who you are. We don't have to hide or to be ashamed of what our values are.
I think you're right. I actually had this conversation with a fellow podcaster about a year ago because I wasn't sharing my own personal opinion. And he said, you may lose listeners, but you're going to gain other listeners.
Yes.
The people that have those same values, they will really appreciate when you speak up about those values. So anyway, I guess there are some gray areas in all of here in this area is what I'm getting at. Well, so as we're going through the process of cleaning up our brand online, I noticed that there's actually services that you can hire and pay to clean up your personal brand for you. I've never used one of these
Yes.
services. So I was curious, based on what you've seen, do you have any opinions about whether or not you would recommend we try one of these services?
I know a couple of people that work in these and actually own those kinds of companies. If you are something like a public person or a celebrity, then that's definitely the way. I don't know how much money that costs. If you're just an ordinary person like I am, then you definitely don't need it unless you get something really nasty online.
Hmm.
But I think it depends on what do you want to achieve, right? And how much are you willing to pay for it. I think it's a good way because those companies are usually SEO experts and they create content, and that's the way how they remove all of the other things that show up on there.
Hmm.
So it costs money, but it's effective if you choose the right company. And I know one lady. She's Indian, and she was married to a guy, and she's a kind of in politics. And then they divorced, and she wanted to change her surname back to her maiden name.
Hmm.
And and she needed to do it fast. So she had like a couple of months to do it. So she hired this agency, the people that I know, and they were very quick, and they managed to, even in India, like where there's lots of content and lots of people. So, but they made it.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yes.
That's
She really wanted to remove the husband's surname from her.
right.
But I guess when you pay for it, then you can find a way, right? I
Hmm.
just think it is for public persons and for celebrities. If you really want to do it, you can do it.
That's an interesting perspective. My background in corporate was
Uh-huh.
working in digital marketing. And so
Uh-huh.
part of what I would do for companies is reputation management, which is very much
Yes.
kind of what we're
Mm,
talking about.
yeah.
And at times, we'd kind of do some things internally, but there were also agencies that we hired to help us with reputation management. So
Yeah.
it is interesting to think of it between the difference between a company and an individual versus like a public figure or a celebrity.
Yeah.
Um, well, I'm
But
curious.
it's always about creating a website.
Mhm.
It is cleaning your social media accounts, everything from Twitter and Facebook to LinkedIn and I don't know, Pinterest or whatever you have, Snapchat. But it's mostly about the website because the website takes the most of the links, the traffic on Google. And creating content, that's the easiest way.
Mhm. For sure. I think it gets more tricky, like you said earlier, like the more that's out there. I know through my
Mhm.
business, um, I have been quoted hundreds of times for the podcast, and
Mhm.
um, sometimes uh, it's hard for people to see that you could do more than one thing. People want to put you into a bucket or a box or something.
Mhm.
And when you try to make a big career transition, it can be tough if you have so much content that is geared towards one particular type of work that you do and you're trying
Mhm.
to switch to a different type of work. I think it's really tricky because it's not that both pieces aren't part of you, but I think because of the bias that sometimes employers have, it just really creates a tricky situation.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, so I'm curious, as we are going through this process and we're looking at social media accounts in particular, do you think that we should have our social media accounts be public or private? What's the best strategy there?
It depends on what you want to show. Uh, so I think all of my social media accounts are public because the only purpose of what I put online is to be public. I never share something that I think should be private. What's private is private. It can go to a direct message, but not on social media. I know that lots of people have, especially Instagram accounts on private, and I really respect that. It depends on what kind of a job you want. If you do digital marketing, if you do anything that's connected to online, then it makes no sense, right? But if you're doing something in a bank or something that you don't actually want your life to be seen online, then private.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very important that you know exactly what you want to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
A private Instagram account is a very, very good thing if you're not working in an online world.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. And it's interesting that you mentioned digital marketing. I think there is some pressure there as a digital marketer to constantly have content to show that you know how to use social media, but you're often having to share content about yourself. So whereas I have friends that opt out of social media at some point, like they shut down their Facebook account. And I find that very hard as a digital marketer to get away from, simply because you need to constantly show that you're up to date with the latest.
Yes, that's how you present yourself.
Right. Right. Well, I'm curious, when we talk about social media, usually we're talking about things like Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, like Instagram, all those things. But when it comes to job searching, the social media that often comes up the most is LinkedIn.
Yes.
And what about LinkedIn in terms of privacy? What do you typically recommend?
Well, LinkedIn is definitely the business social network. And I think all of the people who are looking for a job should have an account on LinkedIn, which has to be updated regularly. What I see with younger people, for example, I was trying to convince my kids to, because they're already like out of high school, create your LinkedIn page, like start working on it because it's important if you want to find a job and so on. And they said, no, that's so like you're old people.
Oh,
Nobody
no.
wants to be there. But when I go to LinkedIn, and it's not a network that you go to regularly like you would go to Instagram. But I see a lot of invitations that are mostly spam, and I think that's the biggest problem of LinkedIn, maybe the only problem. You probably get lots of invitations that have no connections, like no way that you should accept those. But I think if you're looking for a job, LinkedIn is a must. Or if you're even hiring, you definitely need to go to LinkedIn first.
Absolutely. And so with LinkedIn, you can actually, so I typically recommend, if people are comfortable, to have their LinkedIn profile be visible to the public. But you can
But
also.
that's the point, right?
Well, they also have it so that you don't show the details unless someone is a connection. So I often get questions about that. But to me, I think it should be public so that anyone could see sort of your resume. But
Yeah,
just
but it's also, but what do you want to achieve? If you're looking for a job, then yes, it should be open. If you're not looking for a job, okay, you can hide whatever you want to hide.
Sure. I do think, though, it is important, even when you're not looking for a job, to continuously be building your network.
Yes.
So you're prepared. But yeah, I agree. LinkedIn is 100% required.
Yeah, I really think if you want to ever be ever work, you need to have a LinkedIn account.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. If you ever
And
want to
it's
work.
not just if you're looking for a job, because even when you're not looking for something, for a new job, you always want to be there to know what's going on. Maybe something will show up. Maybe you'll just learn something. There are different options that you can use there. You can also state if you're looking for a job or if not. So I think it's a very good network for business people.
100%. I totally agree. Well, I know that you recommend having an online portfolio, and that's, it overlaps a little bit with having a blog and your own website, those kinds of things. But I'm curious, who should be considering creating an online portfolio? Should everyone have one, or are there certain fields where it's really important?
Well, I think for something like designers and developers, they have to have an online portfolio to show, because how you present that you're good at something, you bring other people to say that about you, right? And the design is something that it's always in the eye of the beholder. You never know if it's really good unless you see that there are lots of options that somebody already hired you, that you can show what you can do, like all sorts of different options, creativity and so on. So online portfolio can only be for people who create this art, or who are good in as developers, because they can then post what they have done with the codes. And I've seen so many websites which don't look really good, but you can tell that those people know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And those online portfolios are strictly used to find new clients, usually by freelancers, but finding new clients.
Mm-hmm.
It's also very educational because it shows that they want to learn and to grow more. And I don't know for others, maybe some kind of, I guess all the artists should have their online portfolio online portfolio on their website.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. I think for people who are not this far at the end of the spectrum with like creativity, I do think LinkedIn can be kind of almost like an online portfolio sometimes.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, they allow you now to, I'm sure you know, to put media and to like share links and other things. So and you can share projects and things outside of your work on LinkedIn. So I think that's kind of a good backup. But I really think an online portfolio is a really strong piece, especially if you're in a creative space. Do you think that the online portfolio should evolve as we age, like, or should it kind of be the same?
I think everything should evolve always. And everything should change all the time, because you evolve as a person, right? So even the very famous artists always had some kind of phases of where they would, I don't know, draw only flowers, and then the next 3 years would be elephants or whatever. But that's we all go through these different processes and change, and that's how our work also changes and develops, which is really important to show, because we don't want to show that we are always the same person doing always the same thing, because that's nobody is like that. But even if you are like that, then it's kind of like, do you really want to have somebody who is working in your company who is always doing the same thing?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, we have covered a lot of different topics. Is there anything we're forgetting when it comes to sort of our online personal brand that we should keep in mind?
Well, I think I always speak about websites, because for me, and everybody around me knows that I'm always speaking about it. Your website is like your online home. And even though you have to have social networks, all of those social networks, you don't know if they will exist in like 4 or 5 years, or even in a half of a year.
True.
And then if you lose that, and then you created lots of content and posted it on different social networks, you will lose that. But if you have your own website, it stays there. It's your home. And it's easy to present it on different social media, like on Facebook or even LinkedIn. But if you put everything on LinkedIn and you don't have your own website, it's like you're creating your content and putting into another home, right? But you cannot control. So that's why I'm always speaking about the website. And today it's very easy to make a website. There are so many good applications that can help you to do it. LinkedIn is great, but I think it's only one of the channels where you can post who you are and what you are. Also, like on Instagram or Facebook, it can always also be like 3 different people that you show up on these accounts, because we all have different personalities in our heads, different interests. And your website should actually present all of that. Because when you hire somebody, you want to know if that person has a hobby, because that can also show that somebody's, I don't know, if somebody's competitive and wants to do sports and healthy, or is a good cook or something like that. So I think websites are really, really important to have.
I like that. That's such a good point. I really hadn't thought about it from that perspective. So thank you. Well, Natasha, this has been excellent. Where can we go to learn more about you and your work?
So I work for domain.me. It's a company that sells .me, a domain name. And that's how actually all the personal branding stories go, because lots of our customers already have their own websites on .me domains. So we write there a lot about personal branding because we think that's really important for people. But on the other side, we all in the company started somehow dived into building and helping people creating their personal brands and to look for their jobs, and did lots of research in regards how important that is in everything around internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have my own personal, of course, Natasa.me. But there are many sources about personal branding, and I think your podcast is really good in terms of speaking how to look for a job. So thanks for having me.
Oh, well, Natasha, thank you so much for joining me. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode today, please don't forget to help me out. Go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to the show. The more subscribers we have, the easier it is for other people to find the show. The Copeland Coaching Podcast is hosted by me, Angela Copeland. The show is edited by Daniel Lynn. Our media manager is Jennifer Strafacci. You can find more episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening. I'll see you soon.